Flight attendant spits in black pilot's coffee. Seconds later, security drags her off the plane. The morning sun filtered through the small windows of Flight 2187 as Captain Michael Washington reviewed the day's flight plan in the cockpit. It was going to be a routine trip from Atlanta to Chicago, or so he thought. Michael, a decorated pilot with 15 years of experience, had earned his position through dedication and excellence, rising through the ranks despite the challenges he faced as a black man in aviation. "Morning, Captain. Weather looks good all the way to O'Hare," announced First Officer James Chen as he settled into his seat, adjusting his headset. "We should have smooth flying today." Michael nodded appreciatively. "That's a welcome change from last week's storm patterns. I'm going to grab a quick coffee before we start boarding." "Want anything?" James declined the offer, and Michael stepped out of the cockpit, making his way to the galley where the flight crew was preparing for the day's service. The narrow corridor of the Boeing 737 was busy with pre-flight activities, flight attendants checking supplies and confirming passenger counts. Karen Winters, a senior flight attendant with nearly 20 years at the airline, was arranging beverage carts when Michael entered the galley. There had always been a certain tension when working with Karen, but Michael had always maintained professionalism, attributing her coldness to perhaps a personality clash rather than anything more sinister. "Good morning, Karen. Mind if I get some coffee before we begin boarding?" Michael asked, holding out his empty thermos. Karen's face tightened almost imperceptibly as she took the container from him without a word. What happened next would change the course of many lives that day. As Karen turned to fill the thermos, she believed herself to be alone. Her back to the galley entrance, she glanced around quickly before leaning over the open thermos and deliberately spitting into it. The viscous liquid fell in slow motion, landing with a small splash before she poured the hot coffee over it, stirring once to mask her vile act. Unknown to Karen, Maria Gonzalez, another flight attendant, had entered the galley silently from the opposite end. Her eyes widened in shock as she witnessed the entire incident. Without hesitation, she pulled out her phone and discreetly recorded Karen's actions, her hand trembling slightly with disbelief at what she was seeing. "Here you go, Captain," Karen said flatly, handing the thermos back to Michael with a forced smile that never reached her eyes. "Thanks, Karen. Let's have a good flight today," Michael replied warmly, completely unaware of what had just transpired. As he turned to walk back to the cockpit, Maria slipped quietly into the nearby lavatory, her heart pounding against her ribs. Inside the cramped airplane bathroom, Maria replayed the video she had just recorded, making sure she had captured the incident clearly. Her fingers moved quickly across her phone screen as she texted the video to Sarah Johnson, the lead flight attendant on their crew, along with an urgent message. "Sarah, you need to see this right now. Karen just spit in Captain Washington's coffee." Sarah was reviewing the passenger manifest when her phone buzzed. Puzzled by the urgency of Maria's text, she opened the video. Her expression morphed from confusion to disgust to anger in a matter of seconds. As a black woman herself in the airline industry, she had encountered various forms of racism throughout her career, but this deliberate act against a captain was beyond anything she had experienced. It wasn't just unprofessional, it was assault. Without hesitation, Sarah made her way to the cockpit, her mind racing with the implications of what she had just seen. The pre-boarding announcements were about to begin, but this couldn't wait. She knocked firmly on the cockpit door. James opened the door, surprised to see Sarah's troubled expression. "Captain Washington," she said, her voice steady despite her internal turmoil. "I need to speak with you immediately. It's urgent." Her eyes darted to the thermos in Michael's hand, which he was just about to open. "Please don't drink that coffee, sir." Michael set down the thermos, concern crossing his features as he followed Sarah to a private area away from passengers and crew. James joined them, sensing the gravity of the situation. When Sarah showed them the video, the cockpit fell silent. Michael watched the footage twice, his expression shifting from shock to a controlled, simmering anger that he had mastered through years of facing discrimination. "How long has this behavior been going on?" Michael asked, his voice remarkably calm given the circumstances. His composure spoke volumes about his character and the armor he had built over years of navigating spaces where he was often the only black person in position of authority. Sarah shook her head. "I've noticed tension from Karen when assigned to your flights, but nothing like this. This is assault, sir, and I believe it's racially motivated based on comments I've overheard in the past." Michael took a deep breath, processing the information. "Contact the airline security team and our union representative. We need to handle this properly and by the book." Even in this moment, his professionalism remained intact. This wasn't just about him. It was about ensuring the safety and dignity of everyone who might fly with Karen in the future. The boarding process had begun, with passengers filing onto the plane, stowing luggage, and settling into their seats, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing among the crew. Airline security officers Rodriguez and Patel entered the aircraft, their presence immediately noticed by the boarding passengers who exchanged curious glances. Sarah directed the security officers to the rear galley where Karen was preparing welcome beverages, oblivious to the fact that her actions had been discovered. When she turned and saw the security officers approaching with Sarah and the pilots behind them, the color drained from her face. "Karen Winters," Officer Rodriguez began formally, "we need you to come with us immediately concerning an incident that occurred this morning." Karen's face contorted with indignation. "What incident?" "I am in the middle of preparing for departure." Her eyes narrowed as they landed on Michael standing behind the officers. "What is this about?" Sarah stepped forward, her voice low but firm. "We have video evidence of you tampering with Captain Washington's beverage. The airline takes the safety and security of its crew and passengers very seriously." A murmur rippled through the nearby passengers who had overheard the exchange. Karen's eyes darted around, realizing she was cornered. "It was just a joke," she hissed, her defense falling flat even to her own ears. "He can't take a joke. Always so sensitive." Michael remained silent, his dignity intact as Karen's true character revealed itself. Her comments only dug her hole deeper as the security officers moved to escort her off the plane. "You can't do this to me. Do you know how long I've worked for this airline?" Karen's voice rose as panic set in. She yanked her arm away from Officer Patel's grasp. "This is ridiculous. It was just coffee." "Ma'am, please come with us quietly or we will have to forcibly remove you," Officer Rodriguez warned, aware of the growing audience of passengers. "This is now a matter for law enforcement as tampering with food or beverages constitutes assault." Karen's resistance only intensified as the reality of her situation dawned on her. "You're choosing him over me, after all my years of service." Her voice cracked with anger and fear as she gestured toward Michael. "This is reverse discrimination." Several passengers had begun recording the incident on their phones, the modern-day witnesses to what would soon become a viral story of racism and consequences in the airline industry. As security officers escorted a still protesting Karen off the aircraft, a replacement flight attendant was quickly called in. The flight would be delayed but not cancelled, a small victory considering the circumstances. Michael addressed the crew in the galley, away from passenger ears. "I want to thank Maria for her bravery in coming forward, and Sarah for acting quickly," he said, his voice strong despite the emotional toll of the morning. "What happened today is unacceptable, but how we handled it reflects the integrity of our profession. We will complete our journey to Chicago with the same excellence our passengers expect." The crew nodded in solemn agreement, many still processing the shock of their colleagues' actions. Maria, still shaken, spoke up. "I couldn't stay silent, Captain. No one deserves to be treated that way, especially not someone who has earned their position through hard work and merit." Back in the terminal, Karen was escorted to a security office where airline representatives and eventually police officers were waiting. The evidence was irrefutable. The video clearly showed her deliberate action. As news of the incident spread throughout the airport staff, many came forward with their own stories of Karen's behavior, painting a picture of a long-standing pattern of racial bias that had gone unreported. Meanwhile, Flight 2187 finally took off for Chicago, nearly an hour behind schedule. Michael flew with his usual precision and care, compartmentalizing the morning's events to focus on the safety of his passengers and crew. It wasn't until they reached cruising altitude that James broached the subject again. "I'm sorry that happened to you, Michael," he said quietly in the privacy of the cockpit. "No one should face that kind of treatment, especially not from a colleague." Michael nodded, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "It's not the first time I've faced discrimination, James, and unfortunately, it probably won't be the last. But what gives me hope is seeing how quickly everyone acted to address it. That's progress." By the time they landed in Chicago, the story had already gone viral. Mobile phone footage from passengers showing Karen being escorted off the plane had been uploaded to social media platforms, accompanied by outraged comments demanding accountability. The airline's public relations team was in crisis mode, preparing statements and reaching out to Michael for his input. In the days following the incident aboard Flight 2187, The story of Karen Winters spitting in Captain Michael Washington's coffee transformed from an internal airline matter into a national conversation about racism, accountability, and workplace dignity. The shaky smartphone footage captured by passengers showing Karen being escorted off the plane had gone viral within hours, amassing millions of views across social media platforms. Hashtags like #CoffeeCaptain and #FlyingWhileBlack trended for days, bringing unprecedented attention to the everyday discrimination faced by black professionals in the transportation industry. The airline, initially caught flat-footed by the viral spread of the story, scrambled to address the situation with the seriousness it demanded. Within 48 hours of the incident, they released an official statement condemning Karen's actions in the strongest possible terms and announcing her immediate termination. Trans-American Airlines has zero tolerance for discriminatory behavior of any kind, the statement read. The actions taken against Captain Washington were reprehensible, dangerous, and stand in direct opposition to our core values of respect, safety, and inclusion. What the public statement didn't reveal was the intense internal investigation that had been launched, spearheaded by the airline's newly appointed Chief Diversity Officer, Dr. Amara Jenkins. Her team conducted interviews with crew members who had previously worked with Karen, uncovering a troubling pattern of microaggressions and subtle discrimination that had gone either unreported or unaddressed for years. Flight attendants of color shared stories of schedule manipulation, unwarranted criticism, and exclusion from crew social events, all behaviors that individually might be dismissed, but collectively painted a picture of a toxic work environment that Karen had helped cultivate. The most disturbing aspect of this case isn't just what happened on that particular morning. Dr. Jenkins would later write in an industry publication, it's that it represents the culmination of years of unchecked behavior that was allowed to escalate because the smaller incidents weren't taken seriously enough. This is how institutional racism persists, not always through overt acts, but through the accumulation of minor incidents that create hostile environments for people of color. For Karen, the consequences extended far beyond losing her job. The local district attorney's office, under pressure from both public outrage and the clear evidence provided by Maria's video, filed criminal charges against her for assault and battery, specifically for adulterating food or drink intended for consumption. The charge carried a potential penalty of up to 2 years in prison and substantial fines. Legal experts who appeared on news programs explained that spitting in someone's food or drink constituted battery in most jurisdictions, with the added dimension of potential health risks, making it a serious offense. Karen's initial response to the charges revealed how deeply disconnected she was from the gravity of her actions. In a hastily arranged interview with a sympathetic local news channel, she attempted to portray herself as the victim. "I've given 20 years of my life to this airline," she said, her voice trembling with what appeared to be practiced indignation. "One mistake, one moment of poor judgment, and they'd throw me away like yesterday's trash." Nobody's talking about how difficult it is to work with some of these pilots who think they're above the rules just because they're in the cockpit. The interview backfired spectacularly. Her refusal to directly acknowledge the racial component of her actions, coupled with her attempt to shift blame to the victim, only intensified public scrutiny. Aviation blogs and forums filled with stories from other industry professionals who had either witnessed or experienced similar treatment. The incident had opened a floodgate of testimonials that could no longer be ignored or dismissed. Meanwhile, Michael Washington continued to conduct himself with the same quiet dignity and professionalism that had characterized his entire career. When finally persuaded to give a public statement, he chose his words carefully, focusing not on Karen specifically but on the larger issues at play. "What happened to me that morning is, unfortunately, not unique," he said during a press conference arranged by the Airline Pilots Association. The difference is that this time there was irrefutable evidence and immediate action. Too often, these incidents go unreported or unaddressed because the burden of proof is placed entirely on the victim. I'm grateful to my colleague Maria Gonzalez for her courage in speaking up and to the airline for taking decisive action. But this isn't about one person or one incident. It's about creating environments where such behavior is immediately recognized as unacceptable by everyone, not just those on the receiving end. Michael's measured response earned him widespread respect across the industry. Rather than using his platform to further vilify Karen, which would have been understandable given the circumstances, he redirected the conversation toward constructive change. He began working with the airline's leadership to develop more robust training programs focused on recognizing and addressing bias in the workplace. 3 months after the incident, Karen's criminal case came to its conclusion. Facing overwhelming evidence and the prospect of a trial that would further expose her actions to public scrutiny, she accepted a plea deal: 1 year of probation, 200 hours of community service specifically with organizations serving communities of color, and mandatory completion of a comprehensive anti-bias training program. The judge also ordered her to write a formal letter of apology to Captain Washington, which would become part of the public record. The letter, when finally submitted, revealed a person still struggling to fully comprehend the impact of her actions. While acknowledging that spitting in the coffee was inappropriate and unprofessional, Karen stopped short of examining the racial motivations behind her behavior. "I was having a bad day," she wrote, "and I took it out on Captain Washington in a way that I regret." The carefully worded apology, clearly crafted with legal guidance to limit further liability, rang hollow to many who read it. Dr. Jenkins, the airline's chief diversity officer, used Karen's letter as a teaching moment in the new training curriculum developed for all airline staff. "This is what unexamined bias looks like," she explained in training sessions. The inability to recognize one's own prejudices even when confronted with clear evidence of discriminatory behavior. Real change begins with honest self-reflection, not just compliance with mandated apologies. For Maria Gonzalez, the aftermath of her decision to record and report Karen's actions brought unexpected challenges and opportunities. Initially, she faced some backlash from colleagues who viewed her as having broken an unspoken code of loyalty among flight crew. Anonymous messages suggested she should have handled the matter in-house rather than creating a public spectacle. But for every critical voice, there were dozens of supporters, both within the company and across the industry, who recognized her moral courage. 6 months after the incident, Maria was offered a position as a liaison officer in the airline's newly expanded Office of Professional Standards, where her responsibilities included developing clearer reporting protocols for incidents of discrimination and harassment. "I never wanted to be in the spotlight," she confessed during her first day in the new role. "I just knew I couldn't stay silent when I saw something so clearly wrong." If that video helps create safer workplaces for everyone, then any criticism I've faced has been worth it. The airline industry as a whole took notice of how the situation had unfolded. Other major carriers, recognizing their vulnerability to similar incidents and the potential reputational damage they could cause, began reviewing and strengthening their own anti-discrimination policies. The Federal Aviation Administration announced a comprehensive review of industry practices related to crew interactions and bias reporting, signaling that regulatory changes might be forthcoming. Professional organizations representing flight attendants also seized the moment to advocate for better protections for whistleblowers like Maria. "Our members must feel secure in reporting behavior that compromises safety or dignity without fear of retaliation," stated the president of the Flight Attendants Association in testimony before a congressional subcommittee on transportation safety. The aviation industry depends on a culture where speaking up about problems is not just permitted but expected. For Trans-American Airlines, the incident became a catalyst for meaningful organizational change. Beyond the immediate crisis management and public relations efforts, company leadership commissioned an independent audit of their hiring, promotion, and disciplinary practices to identify potential systemic biases. The results, while not publicly disclosed in full, led to a comprehensive overhaul of human resources protocols and the establishment of a diverse advisory council with real authority to recommend policy changes. 1 year after the coffee incident, the airline hosted an industry symposium titled "Building Inclusive Excellence in Aviation," featuring speakers from across the transportation sector alongside experts in organizational psychology and diversity management. Captain Michael Washington, now promoted to chief pilot for his regional hub based solely on his exemplary performance record, delivered the keynote address. "The sky doesn't care about the color of the hands on the controls," he told the audience of industry professionals. "Aviation has always been about competence, precision, and teamwork, qualities that have nothing to do with race, gender, or background. When we allow prejudice to infiltrate our cockpits and cabins, we're not just failing our colleagues, we're compromising the very principles that make safe flight possible." The symposium concluded with the announcement of a new industry-wide initiative, a confidential reporting system specifically designed for bias incidents, modeled after the successful aviation safety reporting system that had improved flight safety by allowing anonymous reporting of safety concerns without fear of punishment. The Dignity in Aviation Reporting System, DARS, would provide a mechanism for tracking patterns of discriminatory behavior across airlines and facilities, enabling more proactive interventions before situations escalated to the level of the Washington Winters incident. Industry sources reported that she had moved to a small town in another state and found employment outside the aviation sector. Her attorney released a brief statement indicating that she was focused on personal growth and moving forward with her life. Whether that growth included a genuine reckoning with the racial bias that had driven her actions remained unknown. For the passengers who had witnessed Karen being escorted off Flight 2187 that morning, the incident became a story they would tell for years, a first-hand glimpse of both the ugly reality of workplace racism and the power of swift accountability. Many followed the case as it developed, some even attending Karen's court hearings or reaching out to Captain Washington with messages of support. Perhaps the most lasting impact of the incident came in the form of changed conversations within the industry. Crew briefings began to include explicit discussions of mutual respect and open communication. Training programs incorporated scenarios based on real incidents of bias, challenging participants to consider how they would respond as either targets or witnesses. The unspoken hierarchies and tensions that had long characterized relationships between pilots and cabin crew were increasingly brought into the light and examined. 2 years after the incident, Dr. Jenkins published a comprehensive case study analyzing the organizational factors that had allowed Karen's behavior to develop unchecked and the institutional changes implemented in response. The paper, which became required reading in aviation management programs across the country, concluded with a powerful observation. The true measure of justice in cases of discrimination isn't found solely in the consequences faced by individual perpetrators, but in the systemic changes that prevent similar incidents from occurring in the future. By this standard, the coffee incident, as disturbing as it was, ultimately served as a catalyst for necessary transformation in an industry that had too long avoided confronting its problems with bias. Captain Michael Washington continued his distinguished career, becoming known not just as an exceptional pilot, but as a vocal advocate for inclusion in aviation. He established a mentorship program for young people of color interested in aerospace careers, often sharing his experiences, including the coffee incident, as object lessons in perseverance and professionalism in the face of discrimination. "I never wanted to be defined by that morning on Flight 2187, he reflected during an interview on the 3rd anniversary of the incident. But I've come to accept that sometimes the challenges we face become part of our story and our contribution. If my experience helps create a better environment for the next generation of pilots who look like me, then something positive has come from something negative. And in the end, isn't that what justice is really about?